Devil Country by David Hardy. Chapter 8. Morning came, and found Oliver lying alone over a large trunk, sleeping away the dawn's gloom. He dreamed of dragons, an exotic myth of the human world he had come to fancy, and the shining white knights which opposed them. He muttered as he awoke from the fury which he beheld in his head. In a peaceful daze, he smiled as he turned to cozy up to his parent. His hand found only air. "Father?" repeated the little devil, suddenly awake. He looked around, trying to see where his father had gone. Opening the cart door, he saw that there was no one in the stable. Oliver's eyes widened as he realized that Leonard had gone without telling him goodbye. He sat on the edge of the cart, dejected, and leaned hard against the frame of the cart door. He felt like keening, but he steeled himself against the urge and held firm. His father had taught him to be strong, and he would be. It was then that he noticed a piece of paper pinned upon the inside of the door which bore all the words he knew by sight. He jumped up, grabbed it, and with the difficulty of one unused to reading words off of a page, slowly made out what it said. Oliver made a long, whistling sigh. He had planned on asking if he could come along with his father. He wondered if that was why his father did not say goodbye. Resigned to waiting, he turned and explored the cart, trying to find the covered trough that they had been using to store their meals of salt pork and beef. He found it a moment later, but found something else as well. His foot grazed against something small upon the floor, which he bent to pick up. He turned it over in his hand, gazing at it with interest. It was small and sharp, and the texture was unusual. Wanting to know more, Oliver took the object over to the light of the stable window. "Scrimshaw!" cried the devil, saying the approximate word with the comfort of his own language. The prince's project seemed very nearly finished in Oliver's opinion. It even looked like a lady, like the prince said it would, wearing one of those long cinched robes the humans called gowns. Oliver's mind reeled. The prince had lost his scrimshaw. He would panic if he noticed it missing. The youth made a fist around the tooth. Resolve burned in his eyes. Moments later, still in the dawn's half-light, the stable doors opened with a crash as the prince's horse and cart flew out of the building, with the young green devil in the driver's seat, snapping the reins to put on all speed. Miles away, morning found Leonard as well. He woke well before his men, used to working on limited sleep, and inspected their resting forms before seeking out the prince. Heinrich was asleep close by, surrounded by wood shavings. Leonard tilted his head in confusion and noticed that the prince clutched something in his injured hand and a knife in the other. He watched the prince sleep for a moment, rarely appreciating such a close inspection of one of his species. He placed his face close to the prince's, inspecting the tiny pores in the skin and the groomed little mustache he wore. It had begun to look a little overgrown, and was framed on either cheek by the rough shadow of a beard. Leonard wondered why it was that humans gained more hair on their faces as time went by, while his own people's children lost their fuzz as they grew. He wondered how long a human's beard could get, if unshaven. He noted the human's breathing as he hovered a hand over the breathing gills upon his neck, and then to the twitching antenna atop his head. Breathing through the same orifice with which one smelt seemed like a strange quirk of evolution, and he wondered if that was why they were so woefully anosmic. He watched the prince's breath rise and fall. He knew what their innards looked like, in a visceral fashion, from his time east. Several of the functions of their bodies were similar, although devils were strictly carnivorous. He then marveled, for a moment, at the human's closed eye. Compared to his own compound eyes, a human's tiny eyeballs seemed hardly enough to see with, but he knew better. Heinrich's blue eyes had better night vision, and could focus on far-off distances more easily. He envied those advantages in the human form, although he knew his own body was superior in other ways. Movement was much kinder to a devil's eye, and devil antennae could pick up unique odors humans could never notice, and detect them from quite far away. He inspected the prince's healing arm, and then looked down at his own. His chitin protected him from harm, but scarred easily, and did not heal quickly if broken. He ran a hand over the bare chitin of his forearm, feeling the criss-cross trail of scars which might never fade. He wondered at a universe which could cause two such radically different species to meet. "My lord," he said, gently. "My lord." Heinrich's eyes opened part way, and, filled with a vision of giant green jaws and golden eyes, he jumped in fear, and with sudden speed swung his knife towards Leonard. The devil stepped backwards to dodge easily, and a moment later, as sleep and nightmare visions faded from sight and memory, the prince calmed himself and looked down at his knife, breathing harshly. "You have very good instincts, my lord," said Leonard. "You would have made a fine soldier had your life followed a different path." "You sound like my brother," said the prince, blushing and scowling at the compliment, and continued. "Well, what is the time?" "It has been nearly 5 hours since we slept, my lord. It is time. We must rally the men." With that, Leonard sprinted quietly away to rouse the next man. The prince sat for a moment, still clutching the knife in his good arm. He looked down at the arm wrapped in the sling and opened his clenched fist. He was afraid that he might have dropped the fruits of last night's labor in his maddened fear, but his creation lay safe in his weak grip. Within the half-hour, the entire militia stood behind the crest of the hill. The plans had been made, the groups split, and the weapons ready and polished. A light, hurried breakfast was followed by a clumsy milling about of farmers and shopkeepers, trying their best to look like fighters. Leonard and Heinrich sat before the quiet ruckus, waiting for the men to ready themselves. Heinrich tried his best not to seem too nervous. He leaned over to whisper, "Shall you not say something before we move out?" "Nothing more need be said. They know their missions, and they have the resolve to carry it out. We only have to seize the moment." "Yes, of course." They both took a look over the crest of the hill to view the campsite, which lay inert in a collective mourning after. After a moment, Leonard stood. "It is time." "Wait! Leonard!" "Yes?" I wanted to wish you good luck," he said, taking an object out from within his travel pack. "I wanted to give you this." Heinrich held up a small, near-cylindrical figurine. It had a rounded base, or about as round as he could manage in such a short time, and rose up in the rough shape of a horse's head. The textured mane stood out to Leonard, as well as the petite eyes on either side of the figure, flared nostrils, and nickering mouth. Leonard hesitated. Horse? "It's a chess piece. Chess is a human game of strategy. This piece denotes a knight. I thought it appropriate." Leonard's mind thought back to his conversation with his son and the significance of a human's gifts. "You made this? And you're giving this to me?" Well, yes." Leonard stood awkwardly for a moment, confused, saying nothing, unsure of how to accept this gift of apparent friendship. "Are you going to take the bloody thing or not?" "You don't have to be so brusque. I'm just not used to your kind acting this way." Heinrich threw up his arms. "Oh, bloody hell! I don't know what I was thinking, giving you something." "Fine, yes." Leonard raised his lower left hand to receive his prize. His hand was shaking. I'll take it." "That's more like it." He held out the small knight and placed it into Leonard's outstretched hand. As he did this, Leonard's right lower hand came down upon the prince's, gently touching the back of his hand. Both upper hands clapped upon Heinrich's shoulders, holding the human in place. Prince Heinrich did not know exactly what to think of this, so he did not pull his hands away immediately, despite being uncomfortably surrounded by 4 bulky arms. The prince could suddenly smell Leonard's cinnamon musk clearly, even with his face nowhere near the rising and falling gills. Leonard, in his moment of quiet, took a long look into the prince's face. "My lord," began Leonard, "I want to be worthy of your faith in me. We have known each other for so brief a time, and we are not of a species, but we have been through quite a lot together already. Someone I care about very much once told me that true peace can only come about by the joining together of both sides. Maybe I can take this gift as a sign that perhaps you might agree." He let go of Heinrich and took the knight from him. He began to roll it between his fingers, admiring it. That's fine, I suppose," said Heinrich, who really had no idea what the devil was talking about. Not wanting to lose face by looking ignorant, he brushed it off as some obscure devil trait when accepting something from a stranger. He turned away from the devil and continued. "We had best rally the men. It's high time we finished this sordid affair." With that, the prince walked off, gesturing for his group to gather. Leonard stood there, stunned. He looked down at the chess piece, the knight, as his lord had termed it. His mind once again drifted away to what he remembered of his son's explanation. Humans gave trinkets as a sign of love or friendship. He clutched the chess piece, his eyes sliding up to watch the sky in thought, remembering lessons of long ago, almost forgotten. From far off, through a spyglass, the exchange between Leonard and Heinrich was seen. "Interesting," said the voice of the bandit leader. "Yes?" said the red-colored devil who attended him. "I'm surprised I don't smell his sincerity from here, bowing and scraping to that pathetic noble," muttered the bandit leader, before addressing his attendant. "I do believe I have discovered a complication. Change of plans. Here's what you should tell the renegades." Down in the camp, there were two classes of bandits. There were those who had foolishly drunk more than they meant, and nearly 5 hours later were still in the embrace of drunken sleep. Then there were the blessed few upon whom temperance had smiled the night before. They slept more naturally, but also lightly. Their sleep could be disturbed, and they had the foresight to lay down by their weapons. Leonard's group approached as silently as they could. Their leader was swift as the wind as he showed them how to go about their objective. He approached a sleeping man and grasped a length of rope, tying it securely to the man's arms, binding his wrists together. He then did the same for the man's ankles, making sure the two bindings were tied together before slicing the excess off and using it to tie down the next man. The rest of the men did as Leonard did, working stealthily to neutralize the sleeping drunkards. Suddenly there was a cry, "Raise the alarm!" And the few members of the temperate group were on their feet, swords and maces flashed, and the men of the village had a moment of hesitation. "Continue to bind the sleepers," cried Leonard. "The best fighters among you stand at my side. They're still groggy from slumber. Hit them quickly. Charge!" There were 5 men Leonard had deemed the best, principal among them being Charles, the young man who had the courage to challenge Leonard on their first training day. These 5 ran forward alongside Leonard, brandishing their staves and swords, and clashed with those who had awakened. "I hear the sounds of battle," said Antony, who had been placed in the prince's group at his own request. "Perhaps we should—" Another loyalist said, "No, we do nothing until the devil gives the signal." With that, the men kept silent, but an unspoken resentment sat in their minds. Why did the devil go ahead first? Why did their lord not lead the charge? For his part, the prince watched intently from his vantage point north of the camp. He was sweating, and his injured arm ached. He didn't want his men to see him at this moment, acting so relentlessly terrified, and was hoping that the stars in their eyes would mask his fear. Suddenly, he heard a buzz from far off. He was impressed that a people whose spoken language was normally so subdued could give off such a hellish noise for a war cry. On cue, he raised his good arm. The men cheered before charging forward. They washed past Heinrich, who stood rooted to the spot, suddenly immobilized by fear, although the men put it down to a strategic move. After the mad dash of his soldiers, Heinrich was alone at the northern vantage point. He tried to unstick his legs, and finally collapsed to the ground, weakened by a terror he hadn't realized ran so deep. He did not want to be here, fighting this battle for these people. He thought back to the palace in Nottingham, his safe, warm hearth, and a stack of record books he could peruse, trying to find evidence of mistakes in the day-to-day running of his ancestral household. He thought that becoming a ruler and a leader of men would involve something quite similar, but on a larger scale. To run the country from an armchair, following the ways of efficiency. He had never imagined being required to run with such rabble. He had led armies, mostly at his father's beck and call, but from so far away that they resembled no more than pawns to be used and discarded at the whim of the crown. Being at the head, a knight charging over his own front line, was a position he could not bring himself to take. He could hear his brother's voice laughing in his ear, belittling him for his cowardice. He watched the backs of his men, rushing to Leonard's aid, and he felt horrible. He thought of the wooden knight he had carved. His mind drifted to thoughts of Leonard, Leonard's selflessness, and Leonard's devotion to his family. Deep in thought, his distracted mind missed the bright green of a devil's arm curl around his face. His arms flew up to grasp his attacker, but another devil, whose arm was painted in the same color, jumped soundlessly out from behind him, grasping both of his arms. A third appeared, and produced a gag of cloth, and soon the prince had been trussed up like a roast. He was easily lifted over the shoulder of the largest devil, who was a red color underneath his green body paint, and was carried, squirming, off into the plains. Clashing swords glinted in the rising sun. Heavy sledges fell and weaved, and quarterstaves spun and swiped in the hands of their owners. Each weapon struck, blocked, parried, but was ever moving. The bandits had begun to lose the edge of sleep, and were increasingly dangerous to the inexperienced villagers. But it was too late. The battle was already decided. In order to end things with as little blood as possible, Leonard rushed to confront the leader, without whom the bandits would hopefully retreat or lay down their arms. One life, and no more need be taken. He ran on towards the small shack, briefly held up by two straggling thieves with swords, who soon found their own warm guts cooling upon the dew-kissed grass. Once he arrived at the shack, he laid a strong kick upon the door. Wood splintered inward as the door ripped off of its hinges. Leonard followed, quickly, buzzing harsh and loud. He held his sword steady and stood in readiness in the doorway for a few moments. When no attack, cry, or reaction of any sort came, his eyes narrowed. His antennae twitched, tasting the air. It smelled strongly of devils, at least 3 different ones, whose smells dominated the room, masking whatever smell a human might have left. He stepped inside, allowing the rising sunlight to shine into the room. There was nobody there. There was only a single chair, sitting at a blood-stained table. Leonard looked around slowly. His instincts hummed at him. Something was wrong. He thought of the devils, and how they were nowhere to be found. The smells and the stains of blood upon the table from meals of rare meat spoke of devil inhabitants. There was a knife sticking up from the center of the table, which had a freshly carved message on it. It was a compass rose, the kind humans used upon their maps, and it pointed the way towards the northeast. Underneath the rose was a simple sentence in the devil's language. "We have him."